So that being said, and if we were writing a comedy script now, what would flow exactly out of the point that you just made well would be the sort of call where the North Korean leader phones up the Iranian leadership and is like, "You guys are total morons. Like, we just had to say that he builds cool hotels and we got everything we wanted. And you did this whole back channel through Switzerland and had this long, convoluted process. Like, what are you guys doing?" Because, of course, the Trump administration utterly jettisoned precisely the sort of successful version of the kind of deal you're talking about. Maybe first you could discuss that contrast, and then we'll get into some of the specifics of the fallout of the Iran pullout a couple of weeks in.
I think there's a very basic point here, Michael, and all of that is absolutely correct. I mean, the IAEA are the people who are verifying Iranian compliance, which they have continued to do since the Iranian nuclear deal was signed. But there's a difference here, and certainly there's a big difference, it would appear, in the eyes of President Trump himself. Iran did not have weaponized nuclear capacity. North Korea did. The lesson to be learned from this is if you have a viable threat, then you get a lot more than if you don't. So what we are talking about here is a compliance with a commitment not to weaponize. We are talking about a controlled lack of weaponization. Now, that's a very different thing. And I think that the irony, of course, is absolutely remarkable. The deal that President Trump has just torn up and thrown away was a deeply complex deal that had at its basis the idea of verification, that point that I mentioned before. Verification not being done by the United States, being done by the IAEA and by its watchdog bodies, by its inspectors who are on the ground, who visit Iranian sites. So there is a complete, it's absolutely science fiction in a way to look at these two cases and to kind of see within which one is being done and the other isn't. But once again, we get back to the point that you made right at the beginning. It's better that this is happening at this stage than that it's not, regardless of the fact that a deal that took years to actually work out and a deal that every other party to the treaty agrees was working, to get thrown out on basically a presidential whim.
How is this playing out? You're at the United Nations. I mean, certainly the Europeans have expressed their strong intentions to try to save the deal. Obviously, China and Russia already had different types of relations with Iran. Although there are some reports already indicating, I mean, I think as an example, I think Nike has canceled their contract to outfit the Iranian national soccer team. What does this look like a couple of weeks in terms of the sort of, and as well as Iran sort of playing a delicate diplomacy of actually seeking to preserve the deal while also obviously reserving its own right to step out of it?
Well, look, it's actually complex, not only in terms of the technology of setting up the deal, but actually the legal complexities of it. Put most simply, this is not a bilateral deal between the U.S. and Iran. Legally, in terms of international law, the U.S. cannot simply unilaterally walk away from the deal. There's legal ramifications there, which will play out in the weeks and months and possibly years ahead. The scenario is quite simply is that the U.S. tacked on by what was then a hostile Congress to the then President Obama, tacked on a clause that has nothing to do with the deal that was signed between the parties involved. And that is that Congress has the right to lift the waiver on sanctions should it so be instructed by the president if the president is not satisfied with the process. Now, that has nothing to do with the deal, but that is something that Trump brought up by refusing to sign the waiver on sanctions, throwing it back to Congress. Congress can now reinstitute new sanctions against Iran in defiance of the deal. But this is all totally separate to the international legal foundation of the deal itself, which is a deal signed by all parties and absolutely specifically within the agreement cannot be abrogated by one without agreement of all the others. So, look, you've got a massive legal mess here that it's quite simple for President Trump and the Trump administration to say, don't want this deal anymore, Iranians are being horrible, they are a threat to the region, okay, we're throwing the deal away. Also stating, of course, that Nobody's arguing the issue of compliance and verification.
Right.
There is no argument about that. The justification for tearing up the deal relates to other Iranian actions as perceived by the United States, not by their compliance in terms of the nuclear disarmament treaty. So we're in a complete legal morass here, and it's very, very difficult to see how it can emerge without this ongoing unilateral action by the United States, which continues to distance itself from long-time allies and also long-time partners in something like a nuclear deal who may not be allies, but in this particular thing were allies in getting the deal through. So you're looking at a sense of isolationism, which lies at the bottom of all of this, which goes far beyond simply the Iranian nuclear deal. It goes to the standing of the U.S. within the world as a whole. And no doubt the Iranians are saying, too, to the North Koreans, don't sign anything with that administration because really its word just isn't worth anything anymore.
Right.